Welcome to DE&I for an Evolving Workplace Culture. I am Sylvia Perez-Cash, HACR's Senior Vice President of Operations. In this session, you will learn how companies are adapting DE&I culture and programs to dynamic work structures. Today's session is brought to you by two great sponsors. Please watch this short video from our first sponsor, General Motors. Thank you, General Motors. Thank you for your longtime partnership with HACR and for your deep commitment to the Hispanic community. Our second sponsor is MGM International. We would like to take this time to thank them for their continued support of HACR as well in the Hispanic community and their dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Thank you again to both General Motors and MGM International. Now, I would like to welcome our moderator for today's session, HACR's Vice President of Strategic Engagement and Initiatives, Jai Vargas. Welcome, Jai.
Thank you, Sylvia. I don't know about you, but I was dancing throughout that whole video.
Me too.
Thank you, General Motors and MGM. And thank you all who are watching who stayed engaged in our symposium over the last 2 days. We have an incredible amount of activity on our social media channels, and we appreciate you posting and, of course, hashtagging us. So thank you for that. This session is titled DE&I for an Evolving Workplace Culture. And let me share with you a little bit more about what that means. Over the last year, companies have come to recognize and appreciate the benefits of multi-dimensional workplaces, with employees shifting to remote work, in-person, or hybrid models. In this session today, we're going to discuss how to mitigate the adverse effect of these work modes on opportunities for career advancement, learn how companies are adapting DE&I culture and programs to dynamic work structures. Now, as we all know, we've been faced with some incredible challenges when it comes to our in-person meetings, our strategy sessions, and our programs went virtual. This affected the work that was in play already when it came to DE&I. What made it even more difficult was the social injustices and unrest we saw that put even more pressure from us to respond from a DE&I standpoint. You'll hear from a number of our panelists that actually have a very personal story to share on what happened over the last 18 months. I'm excited to welcome my first panelist, CeLois, who's the Director of Global Diversity and Inclusion and External Engagement at Bristol Myers Squibb. In this role, she's responsible for overseeing the evolution of BMS's DE&I brand through its global engagement with CBOs, and she'll tell you all about what that means, governmental organizations, educational philanthropic partners, and innovative thought leaders. CeLois, welcome to the HACR stage. I appreciate you being here. Please share with us a little bit more about your role, your job at BMS, and what kind of diversity work you're currently doing.
Well, thank you, Jai. First, I have to say that HACR is one of our most trusted and valued strategic partners at BMS. You really help us achieve our goals to develop and maintain an inclusive culture at BMS. So thank you again for having me be a part of this panel. So I've had a long time career and commitment to DE&I, supporting several companies in various roles like multicultural marketing, foundation, government affairs, and so forth. And so in my role here at Bristol Myers Squibb, again, as you mentioned, I'm responsible for overseeing our global D&I brand and also working with our D&I team to make sure that we are developing a company-wide culture that drives business performance in the US as well as global markets. At Bristol Myers Squibb, we're really inspired by our vision of transforming lives through patients. And everything is about the patient for Bristol Myers Squibb. And so our vision is made possible by over 30,000 dedicated employees who bring unique skills, insights, and passions to their work every day. Bringing innovative medicines to patients requires a workforce with diverse experiences, perspectives, and personal backgrounds that reflect, again, our patients and the communities around the world. So our research indicates that to accelerate business performance, there must be a focus on diversity and inclusion. We believe strongly that diversity is celebrated and inclusion is intentional when everyone benefits, especially our patients. So we continue to maximize the potential every individual at BMS is creating a sense of belonging. Our D&I strategy is designed to create a powerfully diverse workforce and a broadly inclusive culture that brings out the best in every person and advances our company mission while addressing the changing needs of patients and the growing challenges of health disparities. So I really have an exciting role here, a role that really is, that I'm passionate about, and that really has values and commitments attached to that as well. I'm proud of the work that we're doing and leading at BMS. And I have to say that the work that in our partnership with HACR complements and helps us advance our inclusion at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Awesome. Thank you. And we appreciate your strategic partnership as well over so many years. I appreciate you, CeLois.
Thank you.
Now, my next panelist is Ray Dempsey. Ray is the Chief Diversity Officer at Barclays. And prior to coming to Barclays, just a little while ago, he was actually the Chief Diversity Officer at BP America, where he spent over 30 years in roles across engineering, operations, strategy, and external affairs. Ray, welcome to the stage. Tell us a little bit about your new role as a Chief Diversity Officer at Barclays and a little bit more about what you do there.
Jai, thank you. I first have to make an admission. I'm not much of a dancer at all, but when I heard and watched the GM video, I was moving in my chair too, and I even caught myself because I wasn't sure whether or not I was yet visible to anybody else. So I tried to grab onto the arms of the chair and sit still, but that was a fabulous video. I'm grateful to GM for putting it together. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this conversation. I'm really delighted to be here. And like CeLois, I certainly have enjoyed a fabulous partnership with HACR over many years. At BP, we had spent quite a lot of time working with HACR in a number of ways. We're just launching that relationship now in Barclays, where I have been since just March 1 of this year. So I'm just 6 months into my role at Barclays. It's a fabulous opportunity and a great challenge. And in financial services broadly, and in Barclays in particular, we are determined now to move from what has been what I've described as a culture of good intentions around diversity, equity, and inclusion for a very long time, to a culture of real accountability. We want to drive real and measurable progress. At Barclays, we're thinking about this really in just a couple of ways. There's sort of two access points into driving real and measurable progress, and it's through inclusive behaviors and the way that we get ultimately into the hearts and minds of colleagues around the bank, around the world. And alongside it is the approach we take to driving interventions, interruptions in the systems and processes, those core people processes that sort of guide the colleague experience throughout the life cycle, from talent attraction and talent development and talent retention and performance assessment and promotion, and ultimately the success over many years. So we are applying three distinct levers to make progress through that inclusive behavioral and systems and process dimensions. We're trying to drive greater transparency. We think it's really important to share with our colleagues in the bank, and indeed with the world around us, where we are, where there are gaps, and what we are doing to close them. We're trying to push really hard on the idea of accountability, and indeed alongside it, real metrics, ambitions to help us see where we ought to be and the progress we're making along the way. And then to underpin it all, just a really enormous push on engagement. We want to create more conversations. We want people to listen to and learn from each other in service of shaping understanding, beliefs, and then ultimately behaviors that'll create that more diverse and equitable and inclusive workforce that we're aiming for. So I am delighted to be at Barclays. I was told recently that my new person card after 6 months has been revoked, but everyone's still treating me very nicely, and it's a great feeling to know that there's such an appetite to make real progress and to take on the challenges that we've watched and suffered through for a very long time. So I'm delighted about this conversation. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Ray. And I know that you have quite a bit of a fan base. There's tons of Barclays people cheering you on and part of our program. So we're so excited to have you on the screen. And rounding out our very impressive panel, as you can already see, is Anaya. She is the VP of Global Inclusion, as well as Chief Diversity Officer at 3M. Anne started her career at 3M in legal affairs as counsel for investigation, and subsequently moved to the litigation group as senior counsel. Anne has 20 years of experience as a trial lawyer. Anne, welcome to the HACR stage. Thank you for taking the time and the energy to be here. Please share with us a little bit more about your role as Chief Diversity Officer at 3M and anything else you'd like to add.
Well, thank you, Yai, and it's just such an honor to be on this panel with my fellow panelists talking about one of my passions, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have to say, what a spectacular time to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion on the day before Hispanic Heritage Month begins. I came into 3M 8 years ago, really with a thought of a career stretch for me. I'd been in state and federal government, as you said, as a litigator. But the reason why I went to law school is the reason for our conversation today, and that is fairness and equity, and what each of us can do to drive closer to this thing called equity. And so in my role at 3M 4 years ago, I was asked to take on the Chief Diversity Officer role, which was the first time we had a dedicated person to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before, it was part of an HR role combined with talent acquisition and HR for HR. So we really wanted to create a sea change for the priority of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We brought into the oversight of our employee resource networks. We really strengthened the collaboration with our foundation. And we started a listening session, really 90 days of listening for how we could expand the influence of our initiatives as well as our employee resource networks. And what we found was there were a number of people at 3M that were not feeling included. not feeling invested, not feeling really like the priority of D&I was their priority. So what we endeavored to do is to continually increase that feeling of belonging and value by all 3M employees. And we created an inclusion index, and each year we measure how much closer we're getting to 100% of all 3M employees feeling included. Also, as a result of George Floyd's murder, as you know, 3M headquartered in St. Paul, that tragedy happened right in our backyard. So we endeavored to really address disparities inside 3M and in our communities. And we have a new underrepresented group goal at 3M. And the two underrepresented groups at 3M are Hispanic Latinos as well as African Americans. And we want to drive toward really having market availability representation for both of those groups in the United States. And we have a long-term D&I goal that is a global goal, which includes the broad definition of diversity, including gender, people from the LGBT community, as well as people with different abilities. So driving to those indexes, always creating this idea that we're moving closer on this journey to equity, knowing that it's a culture journey, it's a learning journey, and that, of course, it always takes time to get to that end state. So really excited to have this conversation today, and just love all the work that HACR does, and honored to be here.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for being here. So there you have it, everyone. These are our esteemed panelists. I'm going to begin the conversation with CeLois. Now, CeLois, given the sudden shift in multidimensional workplaces, hybrid models, working from home on our computers, is there a story that you can tell us, or one way that your organization was able to pivot or solve for these challenges that we had? And number one, specifically to encourage inclusion.
Well, thank you for that question, Jai. And we are engaged probably in so many different ways. I'm going to pick a couple, but I want to say, in addition to accelerating our enterprise-wide unconscious bias education plan that started, by the way, with executive leadership and now is being driven down through business units and departments, we pivoted some of our focus on a program that we call Possibility Lives. And Possibility Lives is a culture change program to promote innovation and business performance by shaping a culture of inclusion using the science of habit formation. And I was listening to Ray talking about, focusing on some specific areas as well. We actually are focused on the science of creating habits. So we have 3 inclusive habits: encourage every voice, explore new ideas, and eliminate barriers. And the adoption of these habits help us to reduce the effects of unconscious biases, and it fosters inclusion in the workplace. So we now are focused on using our Possibility Lives program as a way to assist our employees in returning to the workplace. And I know there's many conversations and articles that we read every day about the challenges of that, about people feeling comfortable, uncomfortable, wanting to come back, not necessarily feeling safe in coming back. But we're going to be using our Possibility Lives culture program. And when we do that, we know that people will be re-entering the workplace again, as I said, with all kinds of levels of inclusion. Belonging is really important to us, especially considering that some people have joined the organization while remote. They've never even stepped into Bristol Myers Squibb. So we are going to be implementing a program to host, first of all, a global webinar focused on all 3 of those habits that will give people an opportunity to talk about what it feels like to belong, especially when it comes to encouraging every voice. We know that everybody's not comfortable. We want people to be able to talk about it. We want to encourage every time we are having meetings or we're engaging, that we're encouraging voices, we're exploring new ideas, and we most of all, of course, want to eliminate barriers. In addition to hosting that global webinar focused on all 3 of those habits, we will also, through the months of October and December, be doing Possibility Lives habits presented at our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council town halls. And we have over almost 1,000 ambassadors that we call Possibility Lives ambassadors. A lot of them are parts of our 8 PBRGs. By the way, our people and business resource groups, we call our ERGs, will be helping in every way to also encourage belonging and to helping us drive our Possibility Lives work that we'll be doing. These 8 PBRGs, by the way, have full-time leads. That is their full-time job, is to run our network. So as you can imagine, we are very engaged and we have lots of great programs going on. But we do know that the return to the workplace is really important, and it's going to be something that we need to really focus on inclusion as we do that, as we return to the workplace.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you talked about the science of creating those habits and being able to embed that within the conversations and the culture and the inclusion that someone who started their role within the last 18 months or years that we've been at home. So that's extremely important to be able to consider those aspects. And what's also interesting about what you said, and someone asked this question yesterday in my session, is do you compensate those individuals that run those people and business resource groups? And you actually mentioned that you have 9 full-time individuals that simply focus on those business resource groups, which is impressive.
That is her full-time paid job, to focus on those people, to be driving the people and business resource groups. And so we're really proud of that. And I'll just add one more thing, that in terms of the science of habits, we actually work with the Neurological Leadership Institute, and they have developed that program. I think we started in 2016, and we're seeing some fantastic results in terms of how people feel the inclusion and being included and belonging.
Thank you for sharing that. And now, Ray, talk to me a little bit about how you've all been doing this in the last 6 months, because as I know, you also have a hybrid model for some of your employees there. Can you share any of the inclusion strategies that you've all created at Barclays?
Certainly. And CeLois, I have to tell you, I'm intrigued by the approach that you have with the full-time resources, and I may follow up to learn more. We're in the process of evolving our own ERGs, and I know this is a question that comes up often. I joined Barclays in the midst of the pandemic, so for me, there's an interesting reflection in that I came to a very new place in a new industry, and I had to meet everyone through these screens. And I have to say that I wasn't sure how well it would work, and I wasn't sure how quickly I'd feel sort of integrated into the company. But in a way that has far exceeded my expectations, it's actually worked really well. And I often say to people that through various webcasts and conversations and events and town halls, I believe I have managed to talk with and hear from literally tens of thousands of Barclays colleagues in just my first 6 months. And if I'd been sitting in an office, doesn't really matter where, anywhere, no doubt I would have met a good number of people, but it probably wouldn't have been at the scale that we could do through this virtual setting. So for me, that's a terrific silver lining. The example I want to highlight, though, goes really back to what CeLois was talking about. It's our employee resource groups. And when we were all sent home in March of 2020, I know one of the big concerns was our ability to sustain momentum with the ERGs. In large part, the events that they hosted were always in person. They often included a meal. That was one of the big attractions. And now we were going to be forced to try to drive these agendas and these activities without the benefit of being able to gather in a place together and sharing a meal. And in a way that I know has surprised many people, we've actually managed to significantly increase the participation in our ERGs over this period by thousands of people. There's now more than 25,000 Barclays colleagues around the world who are members of our ERGs. And I think that's down to a couple of specific things that we did in the midst of adjusting to this pandemic. We challenged much more partnership, and there are now many more events that are co-hosted by our groups, and that has been a powerful thing. I think that's part of what has led to the significant increase in participation. And we've of course promoted the opportunities to listen to and learn from colleagues in a very broad way, because it wasn't limited to a geography or to the size of a room. It was now very open and accessible through our virtual meeting setting, and that too can contributed a lot to our ability to make progress. So our challenge, I think, as we return to the office will be how do we preserve some of that momentum and some of that connectedness and partnership that we built through this pandemic, while we do create new opportunities for people to gather together in one place to learn from each other.
Thank you for sharing that. Indeed, that is going to be a challenge, right? Because as we know it, when we got together in these planning sessions, it was however many people could fit into the room, 15, 20 individuals. And as you shared, sometimes technology works in our favor. And so we were able to open it up to hundreds of individuals who can share best practices with us, like you're doing now with over 700 attendees at our symposium. So thank you. I want to kick it over to Anne. And exactly how Ray was mentioning, technology has worked in our favor, particularly when it comes to bridging access to individuals who aren't in the headquarters or in New York City or in St. Paul or anywhere that you're located in the US. It's now brought in some of those individuals who have historically been sort of out of sight, out of mind. Can you share with us any wins or work you've done on cultural intelligence, or maybe some communication strategies that break down some of those language barriers?
Yeah, I think much like my co-panelists have mentioned, I think that there is better connectivity across geographies. We're in 70 countries around the world. With that has, I think, exposed a need for a stronger cultural fluency. So with our company 3M being headquartered in the United States, there's always been this feeling of, you know, the decisions are made and the culture is made in the U.S. And there's been a thirst for individuals and leaders outside of the U.S. to have a bigger influence to make what our global company is expressed to do, which is to be globally relevant, to have the ability to have cultural influences and customizations to make it more relevant to where you are in the world. So one of the things that we have done is when we think about, so for example, you know, for decades, we've been talking about unconscious bias. And unconscious bias, some could argue, is not having a lot of forward motion impact on advancing DE&I. So we really turned to our global colleagues to kind of restructure and rethink what we talk about when we talk about bias and make it action oriented. So we had a global team really customize training, and it's really identifying and disrupting bias is what we are doing. And that's part of an overall advocacy kind of approach to diversity and inclusion. For so long, we've talked about processes and raising awareness. And, you know, with my background as a lawyer and an advocate, I want to make change and empower people to bring about that change to wherever they are in their zone of influence, to really be someone who can speak up and bring this culture to life, this culture of inclusion. So bringing people in from all over the globe to really, you know, bring cultural awareness and relevance into our trainings, into our initiatives. So disrupting bias is one. We have global inclusion advocacy sessions that are done locally with the help of my team, diversity and inclusion team, but really kind of finding ways to have conversations, candid conversations about locally relevant issues. So for example, we had a lot of emphasis on race in the United States. We have colorism in parts of the world. We have marginalization all over the world. We have privilege all over the world. How do those various concepts really allow for a region or an area to customize the conversation that makes it most relevant? And we can only do that by including voices from around the globe, for providing spaces to have these conversations in ways that aren't dictated by what's happening in the US, but instead customized to the various DE&I goals around the globe. at the same time having consistency in our culture. So one of our culture pillars is powered by inclusion. There's a strategic approach to that, an enterprise strategic approach. So there's a consistency around the globe, but again, making things relevant and bringing people into a much more culturally fluent strategy for the local areas. I will also say that one of the partnerships that's really played well for us is with our 3M Foundation. So again, back to this, how can we be action oriented and be advocates? We have what we call 3M impact projects in our communities. So the local area identifies something where 3M is uniquely positioned to have an impact in the community to address disparities, and having folks from around the globe come and do an impact project, whether it's a 3-week or even a local 1-week project that can really have an influence and an impact on those disparities in the community that are really top of mind for our employees and how they want to make a difference and really use their position to advance towards equity in the community as well. So those are just 2 examples of how our better connectedness has really forced us to become much more globally connected and conscious of our efforts around the globe and how they are playing out with local employees, and then also at the same time having some consistency for enterprise strategy.
Awesome. Very significant. And you're doing a lot of incredible work there. And I love the tie to the philanthropic and the community efforts that you shared. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I want to stay on that theme when it comes to community engagement and philanthropy. So Lois, I want you to share with me a little bit more, because I know that BMS has an enormous undertaking when it comes to community engagement, philanthropy, and volunteering through their people and business resource groups. Can you share with me some of the ways that you all were able to amplify the philanthropic efforts now in this virtual setting at BMS?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Jai, because as you mentioned, our people in business resource groups are extremely busy with doing some connecting, especially in our areas of the tri-state area where we have a footprint of Bristol Myers Squibb in those communities. But we've significantly increased our commitment to diversity and inclusion since COVID-19 and over the last 12 months through 5 DE&I commitments. The Bristol Myers Squibb and the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation actually each separately commit $150 million over 5 years as part of a series of commitments to accelerate and sustain health equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. We expect that these investments and other efforts will help diverse populations and improve outcomes across all populations impacted by disease, the disease of research that we do. These commitments include improving patient access to care in Black and Hispanic Latino communities by promoting health equity. We've already probably spent about maybe a third of that 150 million from the foundation around health equity. We are also increasing diverse representation in clinical trials. We have a big commitment to supplier diversity by spending $1 billion globally by 2025 with Hispanic, Black women, African American, and other diverse owned businesses, because we also look at supplier diversity beyond just doing those business connections with those entrepreneurs, but we also impact the community. When we're doing something and reaching with these suppliers, we're doing specific things in areas around community engagement there. We've also enhanced our employees' ability to give back to the community by employee giving matching to designated organizations that fight disparities in social justice. We came out with about 12 organizations that we identified as of the George Floyd situation, and those were selected by our people in business resource groups, and we now offer a 2-to-1 match, and giving up employees again an opportunity to really contribute to community in that way. And then last but not least, we're increasing the diversity of our workforce by broadening our pipeline at the executive and mid-career levels to source diverse candidates for critical roles. We're committed to doubling representation of Black and Hispanic representation by 2022 at the executive level for Black and Hispanic employees. And so these commitments are really coming to life as a cultural cornerstone of our organization. We were also just recently announced a strategy around HBCUs, and we have made a commitment to do a 5-year commitment, $10 million step out strategy to invest and support and partner 5 top HBCUs. So I'm really extremely proud of the work that we're doing, and we've got a lot more to do to meet these 5 commitments, but we're on a good track right now and expect to even accomplish some of them earlier than our goals.
Very impressive. Thank you so much, CeLois. Yes, you've got a long ways to go, but you've already made such a significant investment, $150 million over the span of 5 years. Bravo. That is impressive. And now, Ray, I want to have a conversation with you. Can you share with me a little bit more about how this remote environment has allowed for more diverse recruiting, perhaps organizational relationships, or global sourcing?
Yeah, Shai, thanks for that. It's consistent, I think, with the theme that we've expressed actually throughout much of this conversation, that the virtual platform actually broadens our reach, our ability to talk with and engage with people that we previously maybe didn't think we could. And the same thing has proven to be true from a recruiting and a talent attraction and talent acquisition point of view. Just as CeLois mentioned moments ago, at Barclays, we've made a commitment to really strengthen our relationships and our recruiting at historically Black colleges and universities. And indeed, we've focused on 5 in particular, where we're going to really deepen the way that we engaged. And there was a big question about, well, how would we begin to do it? What's the platform through which we can send people to campuses or otherwise create those connections? And the virtual platform has provided for some interactions, some conversations and connections that we probably didn't think were feasible in the old way of thinking about the way we went to the recruiting marketplace. It also, though, extends our opportunity well beyond any particular core or target group of universities. And that's something that I think is a really important proposition is now, while any company may still have a sort of a core focus in terms of the universities and colleges at which they'll recruit, they can also now welcome and invite connections and conversations and interaction with students and candidates from just about anywhere. And the evolution of some of the digital platforms on our side of that have really been helpful in encouraging those possibilities of identifying talent in places that we didn't use to look or didn't know that we could look. And so I think that's a powerful thing. And it's a reminder of some practices and techniques that we have to find a way to preserve as we return, hopefully, to a way of working that included the more physical connections that we enjoyed in the past.
Thank you so much. And Ray, while I have you, we have a question from the audience. Somebody wants to know a little bit more about your story, your career transition from a technical role to Chief Diversity Officer. Tell us a little bit more about how that came about.
Wow, that's a great question. I appreciate the curiosity. I'll be honest. There's a long version and a short version of this, and so I will absolutely give you the very, very short version here. But I did a lot of things in my 30 years at BP. I worked across a good number of parts of our business, from real engineering and operations I ran a region of retail sites. I worked in investor relations and in finance. I was the regional director of functional activity in Latin America and the Caribbean. I had a wonderful adventure. I got to learn a lot and see a lot. The way I found my way into DE&I, though, it was probably serendipitous, and in a way, it was perhaps inevitable. I just didn't know it. But the broad variety of things that I'd done, the broad variety of places that I had lived and worked and had the chance to visit, created this real appetite to find a way to make sure that we were really fully leveraging talent, not just in spite of difference, but because of difference. And I had a chance to participate in a number of diversity and inclusion councils, and the last one was the one that ultimately I then stewarded as the Chief Diversity Officer for BP America. And in those councils, sometimes there were conversations, and sometimes I would challenge, and I would challenge the data, I'd challenge the analysis, and I'd really push us to move beyond sort of the way that we examine things on the surface. The exact same conversations are the ones that I'm doing now at Barclays, and I think it is my engineering and my business background that kind of pushed me to lean on the data as the foundation of understanding where we are, where there are gaps, and what we need to do to close them. So I've told people that I am now a DE&I professional. It's not just my job; it's my purpose and my mission, and I'm having a lot of fun.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. When you get to writing your book or launching your podcast, we'll make sure to share it and support.
I appreciate that. I'll
wanna
keep
hear
that
the
in mind.
story.
You'll hear from me again.
We want to hear the entire story. Anne, in 1 minute or less, I would love to position you for this question here. You mentioned candid conversations.
Yes.
This has been a popular practice as companies seek to listen and support their workforce. Do you think that this practice of listening and digging deeper is going to continue after we get back to the office?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to continue not only as we come back to the office, it's going to continue beyond. And I would say that the way you dig deeper is through transparency and data, and dispelling some of those old myths and busting them with the realities. So, for example, having hard conversations like, I'm always pushing for, in addition to historically Black colleges, let's also talk about, Hispanic serving institutions, and what are we doing to recruit? And this new reality of remote work for us, called Work Your Way, is allowing for us to really recruit in different spaces and places than we have before. So the answer is yes, they will continue, and yes, we will continue to advocate for digging deeper. That's exactly what we need to do.
I love it. I love it. I appreciate you, and thank you so much from the bottom of our HACR hearts to Anne, CeLois, and Ray for your time and your energy and your expertise on sharing with us some best practices that you've been working on for many, many years around navigating DE&I from an evolving workplace culture and what that means for us as we walk back into those offices. And for those of you watching, please add these thought leaders on LinkedIn. Of course, post and tag HACR in everything that you do. It's HACR Symposium 21. Make sure that you tag us on LinkedIn, and let's continue the conversation. So make sure that you connect with these thought leaders and individuals in your industry and continue that conversation so that you can take some of these best practices into your workforce for the overall good of our people and our workplace. My name is Jai Vargas. Thank you so much for being engaged with our symposium. And I'm going to lob it back over to Sylvia, our COO. Sylvia?
Thank you, Jai. And thank you to our panelists, CeLois, Anne, and Ray, for being a part of this incredibly dynamic panel. Before we transition to our flagship CEO Roundtable, I'm going to second Jai's reminder to everyone that we want to see your posts on social media. Please use the hashtag HACR Symposium 21 when you're referencing your experiences with us today. And I look forward to seeing you all at CEO Roundtable. Thank you so much.